He's saying that by Labor Day, with a 60-day window before the elections, that Mueller basically has to shut down his investigation. That's really not quite accurate. What he has to shut down is any public announcements. He shouldn't indict anyone within those 60 days, for example. But he can still continue investigating. He can still continue negotiating with Giuliani about an interview, for example. That should be fine. I think Mueller's smart enough to know that he would be completely excoriated by Giuliani if he did anything improperly during that 60-day period. For example, if he indicted somebody. And I don't think Mueller will do that. Most people think that Mueller is, just from knowing his character, that he would never do anything like that. But Giuliani also said that that the investigation had to end by Labor Day. That there were rules about DOJ rules that said that he had to actually end the investigation, and he just pulled that one out of his hat. There's no reason he has to actually end his investigation. He just has to pause it for a little while.
You just seem to be kind of getting desperate.
A lot of Americans don't really know what the rules of the game are, and so they listen to Giuliani because he goes on news programs every day and says stuff. And if people still trust what he says, he can build up some contempt for Mueller if Labor Day comes around and he doesn't finish up the investigation. So it's just a lot of misinformation and lies, and it can be effective on a certain part of the public who is just not keeping track of this investigation as carefully as, say, you and I are.
Yeah, I mean, there just has to be part of the point, and just better messaging, really, by or just better conveying of what's the reality by Trump, by the Democrats and by the news media, and by maybe even Mueller in some shape or form, that this is okay, we're acting here within the law, because I think it's important that Americans do have faith in more investigation, not necessarily talk about it every day, 24/7, but, I mean, I do think it's important that Americans have faith. We come to what is a good conclusion, and we come to it hopefully as soon as possible, not trying to rush an investigation, but we obviously don't want to drag it out unnecessarily, but yeah, I mean, I really don't think I do kind of struggle to understand that unless there's any major situation that if I do get just like any little thing, just pop it up in front of the midterm just a week before the midterm elections, like Comey did. But I mean, again, I think the voters really do deserve to know, like, if Donald Trump Jr. or maybe Donald Trump did something bad, it shouldn't wait till they've already elected a House or a Senate that will continue to work with him for the next however many years. Like, we should know before that happens. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, if Mueller wants to send a message, and he kind of did send a message, like his last indictment of all those Russians was timed just before the sit-down with Putin in Helsinki. And it made that sit-down a very uncomfortable thing for the president. And I think Mueller did that intentionally. And, he's very quiet. He doesn't do anything in between his indictments. His indictments are kind of interesting reads. They're usually fleshed out, and they usually have interesting tidbits in them. Things that, kind of hint at maybe future indictments and interesting things. I think one of the things that he might drop just before his deadline is maybe an indictment on Roger Stone. I think that there's probably enough evidence against him for an indictment. I think it would be if he has anything on Trump Jr., which I think is less likely, but even if he did, I don't think he would indict him just because he's so close to the president, and he would really risk the president, firing Mueller if he did something with Trump Jr. or anybody close to his family, like Jared Kushner, for example. But I think Roger Stone is someone who's most likely to be indicted before Labor Day.
Yeah, so he's definitely probably going to try and get that out, and it's very likely, in my opinion at least, that we'll see some sort of burst, maybe of news before Mueller goes dark for that for that time period.
I think that Mueller wants to send one more shot across the bow before he goes silent for 60 days.
Yeah, no, that does seem likely. So the thing is though, Mueller does want to talk, and Trump does want to talk too. Giuliani told NPR's Ryan Lucas, but only the special counsel agrees to constrain himself to certain questions and not to broach other ones. Mueller's next move at this time is not clear. Trump is willing to entertain questions about whether he or anyone in Trump's campaign conspired with the Russian attack. Giuliani said the answer presumably will be no, in the same way it has been all along in public. So, so he, it's not like, but then the consequence of saying no, if it's proven wrong, to Robert Mueller is even greater.
Yeah, I think this is kind of, if I were his lawyer, I'd be much more willing for the president to talk about obstruction, what his state of mind was, because it's much harder to plant give him like what they call a perjury trap. Because, you're talking about your state of mind. You can't really say whether that's true or false. You can't really prove what someone's state of mind is. All he can tell you is what his state of mind was. But if he allows questions about collusion, for which things haven't been publicly divulged yet, and Mueller knows a lot more, say, about collusion. Maybe he knows what Carter Page was doing on his trips to Russia. Maybe he knows what Michael Cohen was doing in Prague. If the president gets asked questions about those things, and there's some evidence from other witnesses that the president knew about these things, and then he lies about them when he sits down with Mueller, that's much more of a clear-cut lie, and he's much more open to perjury in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. There's whether he tries to go at him or not, there's definitely a good chance that Trump will not have all his facts straight in some shape or another. So it also suggests how confident Trump and his camp are that there are nothing to the collusion conspiracy rumors surrounding Russia, at least involving the president. We also have seen some collusion with Trump Jr., and the allegation made by Michael Cohen that Trump Jr. is aware, or Trump knew of the Trump Jr. meeting, which would be really collusion if it was corroborated, although unsuccessful. And that was a crazy story. But and the alleged obstruction of justice track is another story. So Trump will not address questions about his firing of Comey or his handling of the case of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Giuliani said Trump's public explanations in those areas have been so varied, and Trump's lawyers don't want a perjury trap. That does seem to be, to me, probably a smart idea. It's probably the area where, there isn't too much evidence, but there's just so many different stories. It's really tough to come up with a clear one.
Yeah, but Mueller isn't going to agree to those terms. Those are the most important aspects of obstruction of justice, and they have to be discussed. If he agreed to those terms, then he wouldn't have much to discuss with the president outside of maybe some overtures that his prior counsel, John Dowd, had with Manafort and Flynn about possible pardons. That's a kind of obstruction, right? So, and maybe he could discuss what those tweets that were attacking Jeff Sessions were all about. But those don't really go to the heart of the obstruction. The heart of the obstruction was the Comey firing and the state of affairs around the Flynn firing. Yeah,
so that'll be very interesting. But the final question I want to ask you on this situation is the Labor Day cutoff idea. Is that a real thing? Or is it just kind of a manufactured narrative by the Trump people?
Well, what Giuliani is saying about Labor Day is false. He's saying that, the investigation has to wrap up. A report has to be given by Labor Day. That's the cutoff. That's baloney. What is true is that Labor Day is kind of the cutoff that we've been hearing of when Mueller has to cease making public indictments and things of that nature until the midterms are over. So it's just a matter of making sure that Mueller doesn't do anything that will adversely affect the election. He can do something right before it, though. If he really wants to send a message, he can do it right before Labor Day, and it will almost have the same kind of effect.
Mm-hmm.
It just won't have the Comey effect of being like a week or two right before the election, dropping a bomb like that.
Yeah, that definitely would be a little bit crazy. All right, anyway, we are now going to turn to Chris Collins, who made a little bit in the news this week. He is in trouble for really doing some not very good financial crimes, wire fraud, lying to investigators, securities fraud as well. What are some of the details about those charges facing Chris Collins of New York, Republican, 3-term congressman?
Yeah, so Chris Collins is a conservative Republican in upstate New York, a 27th district, where Buffalo is. He's a very wealthy man. He made his money in business before entering politics. And he sits on the board of an Australian biotech company that had some trials on some drugs to, I think it was multiple sclerosis or something like that they're trying to get a cure for. Not sure if I have that right. And so, it was a startup company. This is their only product. And so everything pretty much hinged on this one drug for the company to succeed or fail. And they finally got an agreement with the U.S. To have a trial of the drug. And Chris Collins had maybe bought about 25% of the stocks in this company. So he owned a huge share, and he had convinced his son to buy a lot of shares, and his son's fiance's father bought a lot of shares, and a bunch of friends of theirs had shares. Being that he was he was a chairman of the board of this company, Chris Collins got some inside information about the effect of this drug trial, how the trial was going, and the news was not good. The drug was a failure. So he got word of this. He called his son. There's phone records that show that he called his son like 6 times when he got word of this. And then there's some timing that shows that his son sold stock, heavily in the company, and that his future father-in-law sold stock. Chris Collins himself did not sell any stock, but that doesn't mean he didn't commit a crime. It's like considered insider trading if you are privy to information that's not publicly available and use it to manipulate stock either by buying or selling it. So that's pretty much what he's being accused of.
Yeah, so he is part of this whole insider trading thing here. So he is fighting a prosecution, and he is now going to suspend his re-election campaign. That's the terminology there, and will attempt to remove his name from the ballot. So he is going to get out yet. So Yeah, he's still fighting here to clear his name. Under New York law, Colin's name can be supplanted on the ballot at this stage of the cycle only if he dies, moves out of state, or is nominated for